And it turned out to be our demonstrator for capabilities like things like the AIM-7 and whatnot. But it became real famous when we got to the day that we were going to go do a demonstration at the plant before we took the airplane to the Paris Air Show. And if any of you were out there that day, I was announcing in the tower. Neil Anderson was in the airplane. He took off and he did what we call a rolling 270 while he put the gear on. Well, the gyroscopics of the wheel spinning and the rotation lifted the gear up and locked it onto a launcher so it wouldn't come back down. So we finally talked about it for a while, and when you're doing air shows, you don't have a full bag of fuel. You only have about enough to do the air show in about 10 minutes reserved. So we didn't have a lot of time to think about what we were going to do, and we finally decided that we landed in the grass. And what we didn't know was there was a mound about that high, and Neil touched down just in front of it and went airborne again. The airplane kind of did like this and came to a stop. Neil was not a happy camper. Dick Adams, who at the time was the general manager for the plant, came through the tower and said, "What are we going to do?" And I said, "Well, we're going to see if we can fix it, but I've already called Edwards and told him to get YF-16 number 1 ready and bring it to Fort Worth, so we had to, we could use that one." That's what happened. We wound up taking YF-16 number 1 to the Paris Air Show. Actually, YF-16 number 2 was fixed, and we were still toying with maybe taking it, and the day we did the engine run, it spotted the engine, so that kind of took it out of play. The next thing that you hear about the YF-16 number 2 was in 1979. It had a nose gear accident, and it came to a screeching halt on the runway, and it came to a screeching halt as a flying program. The airplane was bailed to Air Force Flight Test Lab at Rome, New York, and that's where it stayed until 2019. And now I'm going to let Kevin take over and tell you what the restoration team did. And I got to tell you, folks, I'm going to tell you something he probably won't tell you. Most of this airplane was restored out on that ramp. No rug, no covers, nothing else. We couldn't figure out how to paint it that way, so we did put it under cover for the paint job. But anyhow, Kevin, thanks for taking.
In my previous life, I see a lot of my old friends here. I spent 41 years out at General Dynamics / Lockheed. The best part of that was I learned my engineering trade from the guys that designed this airplane. I sat next to Gordon Gibson and Travis Putman and all the guys that worked on this airplane originally, did a lot of design work, and I couldn't think of a better way to have started my career. Being an engineer, I have to have PowerPoint slides, so we can see some pictures of these. Picture in the upper left, I'll stand back here, is, I call it baby picture. That's in Hangar 8 at the experimental building. That's where the 2 aircraft were actually built. That's before it was painted the first time. Then it got many, many coats of paint. On the upper right, you'll see Phil Ostreicher kneeling in front of the airplane as it rolled out in a blue and white air superiority camouflage job that turned out not to be very superior. It turned out to be a higher contrast than they really wanted. That paint job only lasted about a month, and then they put the gray paint job on it. You'll see it flying alongside one of the YF-17s in the lower left picture there. That was the just one color gray. They call it Compass Ghost. They just sprayed it real quick out there at the Edwards paint shop, and that's how it flew most of its career during the flight test program for the YF.
What's that approved? I don't know.
Then they put the air show paint job. Number 1 always had the air show paint job. Number 1 was the aircraft that did Flight 0, where it inadvertently did a go-around the pattern with Phil. A couple things they discovered on that one is that they had engines from an F-15, and you really don't want the same idle thrust levels in F-15. They had to wick them down with these airplanes. You see it there with an F-4, just kind of a size comparison. And that was the airplane we would replace eventually with a much smaller, lighter, much more effective airplane. As Zim said, number 2 was the only one of the 2 airplanes that had full capability in all the pylons, including fuel tanks, weapon separation, and the internal gun. radar in the front. We'll show you the radar here in a little bit. But that was the airplane that did all of the tactical testing. It was kind of the pilot's favorite because they could go do real things. It wasn't so much flying test points and doing aero performance and being exactly on the right piece of S-point. This was the one they got to go tangle with F-4s. They even took it up to Nellis and did dogfights against some of the captured Soviet aircraft that were in the operation up there, the Red Hats. So this airplane got a lot more work than number one because it was outfitted for tactical work. You'll see it there chasing the dart. They actually went up and shot the gun, shot the dart. I saw Carl Drosky here earlier. He was one of the flight controls guys. And I think there's a little story in his book about the trouble they had getting the rudder kicker in the right direction. Initially, when the gun fires, the airplane wants to yaw. There's the correction. Well, if you get the sign wrong, it goes twice as much in one direction. Early when they got out there, they did tank the aircraft, prove it was compatible with KC-135 and KC-97, old propeller-driven tankers, which is what's in that picture. They had actually done some testing here in Fort Worth, out on the ramp with a two-level ramp. They had a KC-97 parked on the ramp and the F-16 on the lower level to prove that the boom wouldn't hit the canopy or anything during testing. Lower picture there, strafing. They actually did air-to-air and air-to-ground gunnery with the aircraft. Famous pictures, the Great Oops of May of 1974, or 75 rather. Those are stills from a video, which is why they're not really sharp pictures. Neil brought it in just fine. He said, right as he got ready to land, chopped the throttle, the pilot cut off, put that hand on the D-ring in case the airplane decided to do something unusual. He was getting ready to leave. Slid to a stop after it hit that bump. And if you see the videos of this online, there's video on YouTube, you can see the aircraft flexing in space. As we took it apart and worked on it, we actually found the evidence of where the repairs were and where fasteners had been pulled through bulkheads. It's aviation archaeology. We found the residue of this incident. Now, as he slid to a stop, and number one and number two, the two prototypes had manual canopies. You unlatched them and just pushed up. Neil went to jump out and realized he had not unhooked his oxygen mask. So you see the video, his head kind of jerks back because he forgot to unhook the oxygen line. He ran about 50 feet and he was mad, so he took off his helmet, spikes it on the ground, just in time for the fire truck with the 8-foot wheels to show up, and reduce his helmet to, you have it handy?
I've got it in time.
I didn't know we were going to have props today.
You have the helmet.
Oh, there's his helmet.
With the tire now.
So this aircraft was also one that the company modified to test shooting AIM-7 missiles off the landing gear doors. They put a different set of doors on it. This was part of proving if the Navy wanted to buy this, we could shoot AIM-7 BVR missiles off this little airplane. They didn't think it was possible. The company went out and actually paid for this test. This was not a government-funded test. This was a company-funded operation. And then there's the picture Zim was talking about. By 1979, the aircraft was being used as a chase plane during the FSD program. It was easy to go fly this one alongside the new production F-16s. Phil Osterreicher was flying it. The aircraft was designed to only fly 300 hours. By this time, it had 900 hours on it, and it fatigued out one of the mounts for the landing gear extension mechanism. So the gear would not come down and lock. Phil flew it around, tried to shake it, tried to burn off gas. Finally, they said, okay, just go ahead and land. Some of us in engineering, Travis Putton let us know what was going on. We all went up on the roof of Building 200 to watch this event. He held it up as long as he could, and finally he just fell in the nose. You can see the radome is busted off. So the Air Force at that time was going into the FSD and the full-up production program for the F-16. They needed a test vehicle put on a pole to test all the electronic antennas, the electronic warfare packages, what interference you had with all the different combinations of stores on the jet. So starting in 1979, 1980, went up to Rome, New York, Griffiths Air Force Base, and they started doing the mods to make it look more like a production airplane. They actually undid the forward splice in the aircraft, moved it forward 10 inches. Herb was talking about this in his presentation earlier today. Did some unusual sheet metal work in there. There's the thing we call the Brooklyn Bridge they put in the ammo drum. It's all angle iron and held the thing together. Put it up on the pole. Now the problem was it was upside down for a long time. And the reason they do that is you're looking up at an airplane from the ground. It's the same if you turn it over. It's easier to do that. Put their test equipment up on a hill and look down on the airplane. The downside of having it upside down for 30 years is there's no water drains on the top of the airplane. We have a 6-inch high water mark inside the ammo drum of this one, inside the ammo bed. It made it interesting opening the airplane up. There was lots of just screws that were little balls of rust by the time we got the airplane. First time we saw it down there in the lower right corner, it was sitting upside down on a trailer up at Griffiths. It had been put on the GSA surplus list, and if nobody had claimed it was going to Eglin Air Force Base to be blown up as a test subject. Jim and Ben and some of the other folks in the museum became aware of this, got in touch with our congressional delegations in Washington. Congresswoman Granger got on the case of the Air Force Secretary and convinced him this was a better home for it to send the aircraft back to Fort Worth where it was born. It showed up here after that on this nice big picture back here. This is kind of how it arrived. You can see it's still got parts of their tower hooked to it, big steel plates holding it together. They had punched lots of extra holes. Every antenna on any version of the F-16 ever built was tested on this. Whether they belonged on there at the same time or not, they were all put on. You can see some tape on the inlets. Those were some big EW antennas going to Israeli airplanes. You can see the paint scar on the fuselage for the conformal tanks for the Block 60. So that kind of shows you the other end of how long this was in service as a test subject. You'll see in the pictures over here, we decided early on, when we got the airplane, it had no landing gear doors. The front end, they spliced on a production radome, which is much larger than the YF radome. So we went through that. The question was, what are we trying to do with it? What are we trying to make it look like? And we picked a time, we wanted it to look like it looked right before Neil's flight in May of 1975. That was kind of our model of where we were headed. So that meant we had to take that splice out. So we had to make home-built tooling, and we were out here on the ramp, and Bill Morris in the lower left corner there was leading the project at that time. Fortunately, he's no longer with us, but he was very insistent we get this thing back to that condition. But he refers to what we did, and you can see the picture in the middle where we undid the thing. We had it on little railroad tracks we built using things from the Master Car catalog. We built a little separation fixture and got it back together, and all the fasteners fit after we took the 10 inches of extra metal out of the middle. But Bill said we did a depot level overhaul at the O level down here on the flight line. You see other things, the red wing at the bottom there, that's where we scraped it one layer of paint at a time. Through the 6 layers of paint it had till we found the air show paint job so we could measure how big were the stars and bars, make everything accurate, make it look like it looked back in the day. More aviation archaeology. The inlet, you see the chin down there where Jim Doherty and Don Crowley are doing some sheet metal repair. That's where it landed on its chin when the radome broke. Luckily, I was blessed with several guys that were great sheet metal mechanics to do this kind of work. So then we needed a landing gear, and Ben Guttery, our A-1 scrounger, found some parts up at Shepherd Air Force Base. There was an F-16 that had been caught in Hurricane Andrew down in Florida. It had a hangar fall on it. And Shepherd was turning part of the aircraft into a fuel system trainer, and they threw the landing gear in the corner and said they didn't want it anymore. Ben showed up in his little station wagon with all these pieces of landing gear stacked in the back and said, here, make something out of this. And we did. Luckily, we had everything we needed. Travis Putman designed both the YF and the production landing gear, and production Block 25 gear just plugged right into the open. We ended up with the gear together. The 301st over at Carswell found out this tail number is still active in the Air Force. The airplane actually belongs to the Air Force Museum. It's on long-term loan to us. But because it had a real tail number, the guys at the 301st that were flying F-16s at that time could put spare tires on it. We traded in the old tires. So then we had, okay, in the middle there is a picture from PPG Plastics over in Grand Prairie, used to be Techstar. They took on the project of making us a new canopy, and you'll see it in just a few minutes. That's the old plastic that's been outdoors for 50 years. Turns yellow and cracked and nasty. It took them several weeks of prying to get it off the frame because of the sealant used. They got it off. You'll see the new one. It's just a beautiful piece of work. In the upper right corner, you saw the radome was broken. And there's a company over in Wiley, Texas called DCU Models that builds full-scale models of the F-35 for the company to use as displays and traveling road shows. They volunteered to make us a mold for free if we could get them an electronic database. And my friend Remy Moore is sitting here, who is the master of all CATIA things. We took the paper drawing we had for the jet, and he made a 3D CATIA model that DCU cut, and Butch Sickles, over here, our master fiberglass guy, made us a whole new front end for the airplane. You'll see it, and it just, you can't tell that it wasn't original on there. Then we shipped it up to Prop Wash Airport. Cowtown Aircrafters is a custom aircraft shop up there. They paint airplanes. Everybody's familiar with Oshkosh. They build airplanes that win prizes at the big Experimental Aircraft Association show. They've had it up there for about a year. It's been part-time work. It hasn't been worked on every day because they have to make a living also. But Thursdays and Saturdays were their days to do good things for us, and they did a beautiful job on the airplane. You can see the markings going on, being painted. Brought it back down here. Local trucking company donated trucking both ways. Pronto transportation or delivery. Tough part about moving that airplane, that trailer is 102 inches wide and the wheelbase is 100 inches. So it's a little nervous rolling it up on the trailer. But we got it there, got it back, got all the pieces. We had to make some more tooling for how you pick up wings and turn them over. We don't have those nice big metal fixtures that are out in the factory. We had to make wooden ones, and it worked. We adapted, overcome, as we say. Got the airplane back here. Just in the last few weeks, we put all the big pieces back together. We've been painting things separately. Once again, we needed how to put the vertical tail on. Well, we've got a big forklift and lots of cables and straps and things, and blankets to pad things so we don't scratch the paint. Got that on the first try. Once again, Don Crowley working on leading edge flap seals. We had to rig the flaps once we had the wings on the jet. We built a cradle to hold the wings at the right height to bolt them onto the aircraft. Got it all done. And I think that's all the pictures I have. And we're going to let Jim talk for a few minutes, and I'm going to show you the results of all this. Thank you, Cameron.
So we've got a couple more pieces of business here that we have to take care of. First of all, we've got some guests here that I want everybody to be aware of. We've got former Secretary of the Navy, Gordon England, is here with us today, and he's also a GD patient. And we have Neil Anderson's wife and son are with us here today too. So we can't open the curtain until I thank some other people. And some of those people are the staff of this museum. We are celebrating our 25th year this year, and an awful lot of work has taken place over the last 4 years to get ready for today. Some of you are sitting on brand new concrete. Just a few months ago, it was gravel. So this was all part of our modernization that we're doing here. But what you're going to see is an airplane that's a one of a kind, and I will put its restoration up against anybody's. Smithsonian, Air Force Museum, Pensacola, any other museum anywhere, except that our people did it outside for 4 years. Summer, winter, rain, COVID, everything. They did it out here. So we're going to have to take the next step, which is going to be to build a new building here on the property to house this airplane so it will be properly taken care of, along with several others. We have the largest collection of tactical aircraft in the state of Texas. Simple, 35 airplanes here. Some of them are one of a kind. This is a jewel. This is probably going to be the icon for the museum for at least the next 20 years, although some people say the airplane's going to serve for another 50, so maybe it'll be the icon for the next 50. So I want to thank my staff here at the museum for all the work that they've done on the backside, keeping the museum open, those instead of taking people through. But then I want to recognize by name the people who worked on this airplane. We don't have the whole restoration crew here, but I'm going to go through the names, and as your name's called, if you would please come up so everybody can recognize you. We have the crew from Prop Wash, and it's Brad Harston, Kanan Kozowski, Charles Rooks, Doug Falk, Jerry Asher, Lanny Parcell, and Tom Swindle. Most of these people were here for a special reception for Kay Granger. She was only available on Thursday, and so we had her out here for that. From the Fort Worth Aviation Museum crew, we've got Janice Truitt, Ben Guttery, Bill Morris, and we had Chris Morris here, his son represented Bill before. Bill Waite, Butch Sickles, David Anderson, Don Crowley, Heath Thomas, Jason Harris, Jazard Singh, Jim Bluebird, Jim Duarte, Jim Wittenberg, Kevin Nelson, Kevin Renshaw, Mark Hamilton, Mike Amtower, Paul Duncan, Rich Garrett, Rick Oestreicher, and his son was here to represent him, Steve Smith, Tony Marotti, Tim Storm, Tom Kemp, Tristan Tillman, and Wes Cloud. These are the 30 people who've spent over 10,000 hours at least. So they have one final act to do right now, and that's to go back behind and be ready to pull the curtain here in a second. So if you folks will go behind the curtain. Okay, Tom, thanks. Tom's got the key to the screen right now. So while they're doing that, I think there's a few things that I think it's interesting to know. One day, and this was probably close to 8 years ago now, Ben Guttery came to me and he said, YF-16 number 2 still exists. We didn't know that. We didn't know where it was. YF-16 number 1 is in the Virginia Air and Space Museum for some reason. But he said YF-16 number 2 still exists. It's out in Rome, New York. And he said, is it okay if I write them a letter and see if they still need the airplane? And we said, yeah, sure, go ahead. Well, they got back to us after a little while. We didn't hear anything. They finally came back and they said, this airplane's been here doing its duty for 41 years, and we think it's probably time for it to go back home. If it had only been that easy. That started a long process of working with Congresswoman Granger in particular and her staff to bring this airplane here. She was steadfast. She has helped us all along for the 25 years. She helped us with our first airplane and now with our last one. But it became a real tour de force in some respects. We had to go through a process with the Air Force Museum to be certified by them. And I really think that they thought once we got the airplane, we were going to slap a coat of paint on it and put a pole underneath it and call it a day and go home. That isn't what took place, and I'll mention that in a second. But with Congresswoman Granger's office, it was almost 4 years of her helping, in many cases, directly to be able to bring the airplane back. Don't pull it yet. So at any rate, she did an awful lot of work to get this airplane here, and the simple fact of the matter is she didn't just sign a form or two. If it was not for her, this airplane wouldn't be here. We estimate that over the 50 years of the existence of the F-16, there's been at least 400,000 people who've worked out at the plant to build these airplanes. And it's not just that, because this airplane has built families, it has sent people to college, it has made doctors, it's made lawyers, it's done all kinds of things here. So this airplane is Fort Worth. This is a treasure of Fort Worth. And folks, now let's move that jet.